Cool. So hopefully most of you know who I am. I'm Jonathan Sriranganathan. I was a Greens City Councillor for 7 years in so-called Brisbane, and in 2024 I ran for the mayoral campaign in Brisbane City Council. I'm coming at you from Yagara and Turrbal country on unceded Aboriginal land. I wanted to acknowledge and pay respects to elders, and particularly just emphasize that I think a lot of us in this room recognize the Greens still have a long way to go in terms of showing solidarity with First Nations peoples. There are some very deep tensions and contradictions involved in running for elected office and participating in electoral political campaigning in a context of settler colonialism, and we can't be naive about those challenges and tensions. I also wanted to note that we'll probably be talking a little bit about racism and all sorts of stuff today. And it's a shame we don't have any First Nations speakers as part of this discussion. But I wanted just to underscore that even though we're not centering that part of the discussion today, it's really important to keep it in the forefront of our minds, and that we make space for future discussions that do center Aboriginal voices a little bit more in these spaces. I like to just welcome our three illustrious speakers or co-panelists today. I'm just going to invite each of them to introduce themselves briefly. Huong, I might go to you first. Tell us a little bit about who you are and whose country you're on.
Hi everybody, Huong Truong calling from Wurundjeri country, the land of the Bunurong and Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations. I'm a community organizer, a single mum of two. My parents came here as refugees, as Vietnamese boat people. And I've been in the Greens since 2006. And I was the Greens state MP in 2018 for this region out west of so-called Melbourne. And I was recently your candidate for Fraser.
Thanks, mate. And over to you, Remah.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Remah Naji. I was the Greens candidate for the federal seat of Moreton. I'm a daughter of Palestinian refugees. I grew up in Jordan and I arrived in Australia, so-called Australia in 2013. I'm on Yagara and Turrbal land, and I also want to acknowledge the parallels between the colonization here in so-called Australia and also in Palestine. And I acknowledge that colonization isn't just a moment in history, that the violence of settler colonialism continues through incarceration, continues through racism, through patriarchy, and we can see it in everyday life. And it is our responsibility to fight it every single day to make sure that we are actually walking the walk, not just talking the talk, especially here within the Greens as a political party.
Well said, Remah. And Remah was our first-time candidate for this federal election and did phenomenally. I should have noted that I was also working on Remah's campaign and helping out a bit behind the scenes, and that was my main involvement in this federal election. But probably the busiest and the most active among us was our Senator Mehreen Faruqi, who's congratulations on being reconfirmed as the deputy leader of the Australian Greens. And thank you for making time to join this discussion. It was originally just going to be me and Huong and Remah, and then I told Mehreen about it. And she's like, I've got to be part of this too. And I was like, yes, awesome. You want to say a few words, Mehreen?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jono. And yes, lovely to be here with you, and so excited that we are having this discussion. And thank you for organizing it, Jono. And congrats to Hung and Remah for running incredible, inspiring campaigns that I took a lot away from, even looking mostly from the outside. I'm zooming in from unceded, stolen Gadigal land. And just want to say that for me, the way I see it, there can be no climate justice, no social justice, no economic justice without racial justice, and there can be no racial justice without First Nations justice. And to all those political pundits and those in the mainstream media who want us to get back into our environment climate box or keep telling us to stick to the environment, you know, anyone who tells you that you can actually do anything about the environment without talking about the oppressive systems that underlie environmental destruction and the climate crisis is lying to you, and the Greens will not be moving away from social justice, racial justice, and climate justice.
Well said. Thanks so much for adding that, Mehreen. Really important points. So as mentioned, this is not like an official party discussion. I just thought it was an important discussion to make space for. I'm not here as a Greens spokesperson, but I just sort of was prompted to organise today's discussion because helping out on Remah's campaign in Moreton, I was really excited and interested to see that we had these huge swings in the southern suburbs of Moreton, which are historically weaker areas for the Greens. So Moreton is a electorate sort of that's the northern end is Brisbane's inner south side, and then it stretches right down to the sort of southern suburbs, which tend to be a little bit more working class, a little bit more culturally diverse. And what we saw in the federal election in Moreton replicated what I'd seen in my 2024 mayoral campaign, which was a gradual but significant growth in support for the Greens in areas where we weren't doing much campaigning. And then with Remah's campaign in Moreton, we saw that when we did campaign actively in these areas, the swings were even more pronounced. And then as the results came in and we started talking to people in different states, we saw that the same thing had been happening for Huong in Fraser. Same thing had been happening in a lot of Western Sydney seats where Mehreen's been quite active with her local Greens candidates and branches. And generally speaking, and I emphasize that this is a big generalization, but generally speaking, we seem to have seen the biggest swings towards the Greens this election in areas where there are higher than average percentages of people who speak a language other than English at home. There are those swings partly correlate as well with housing insecurity. So areas with higher proportions of renters, areas where people have a bit more mortgage stress and are probably facing greater cost of living issues. And there's still a lot of analysis to be done of the election results comparing different booths. But when you compare electorates that are sort of lower income, higher housing insecurity, but still predominantly white Australian, the swings weren't quite as pronounced to the Greens as the areas that have really high new migrant populations. So we seem to be seeing a swing that's partly based on class position, partly based on housing security and financial precarity, but seems to correlate very strongly with cultural diversity as well. And so we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail. But the other reason that I thought it was really important to get Huong and Remah together to chat is that we had in both of them two amazing women of color stepping up as candidates, running campaigns that were quite radical in many respects and that departed a little bit from the orthodoxies of how the Greens normally campaign. And Remah's electorate was interesting because the northern part of the electorate actually saw slight swings against the Greens, replicating what happened just immediately to the north in Griffith and in the other key Greens seats in Brisbane. So the Moreton electorate was kind of a tale of two halves where we had the same candidate and similar messaging. And in the north, there was a swing away from the Greens, particularly in areas that are more affluent, in areas that have less cultural diversity, in areas where there are more people who own their home without a mortgage. And then in that southern mortgage belt with those higher migrant community proportions, really big swings to Remah. But Huong blew us out of the water because you got massive swings to the Greens almost everywhere. I think with the exception of a couple booths around Yarra, which perhaps mirrors the experience in Moreton a little bit, where the more affluent, the more inner city electorates had a slight swing against the Greens, and then the more culturally diverse areas had a really strong swing towards the Greens. And that's what I'm really excited to unpack here today. So the first question I sort of wanted to open up with, and basically it's open for everyone, but I'd be interested in hearing from Mehreen first. Who was swinging to the Greens in these electorates and various Western Sydney electorates in Moreton, Fraser, and why were they swinging to us? I know some people have said, this was a lot of Muslim voters who were switching to the Greens specifically over Palestine, but others have said, no, it's actually a broader range of demographics than that. So were they swinging because of specific issues like Palestine or immigration rights or cost of living issues, or was it a more general rejection of the two major parties? What do we think is going on there, Mehreen?
Yeah, I think it's very hard. I'll come back to that question, but I just want to lay out a picture of what happened in New South Wales. So we have got our highest vote ever. We increased by 1% overall, and that kind of relates to about 65,000 votes at least. vast majority of them coming from Western Sydney and Southwestern Sydney. And, we have in New South Wales, we've got the highest swing of any state, like a highest positive swing of any state. And it is a very big state, as you know, like really big state. So, people, like it's been a bittersweet election, but in New South Wales, we're very, very excited that for the first time ever, so many more people in culturally and ethnically diverse communities have backed us. And I guess we did not do an exit poll as to why people voted for us, but I've been on the ground for years now, and this has gradually been happening since 2019. The increase in Western Sydney, kind of voting for the Greens, but like nothing like this time. And we have some of the teams from Western Sydney and some of the candidates here on the call as well. So amazing work, everyone. So it was, and we'll come to why it happened, I guess. But just to we've got more than 40% swings in some booths around Western Sydney, but like massive, most of them have been above 20%. So hugely. And I've said this a lot during the campaign, and it would have been anecdotal if it wasn't someone stopping me on the street every single day. This is even before the pre-poll, before we, started handing out, stopping me on the street and saying, thank you for what you do for Palestine. And thank you for your strong stand against racism. And go for putting Pauline Hanson. So for me, a large part of it is about the Greens having a really strong and unwavering position on Palestine and on racism. And we did not back away from it or dilute it during the campaign or at any stage of the campaign. We had like Huong and Remah, we had the strongest position that we took 2 years ago and kept going on it. So that's I was in Melbourne last week, and a taxi driver, I was standing by the side of the road, a taxi driver pulled up, put his window down and said, Mehreen, thank you so much for what you do for us. He was someone who looked like me, a brown person. And no one has ever stood up for us like you have. So I think it does matter who you are, but it matters more what you do with who you are, honestly.
Well said.
And I think that's really critical. And I'll just stop there and we can come back to some of the other things, because there's a lot to say on this.
Well, I was just going to ask, because and I'll ask the other two to speak to this as well. But my impression was that it certainly wasn't just migrant community members who identify as practicing Islamic faith. It wasn't just Muslim voters who were switching to the Greens. Am I right in saying you saw it as a general shift?
Absolutely. It was a general shift. It wasn't even just people of color. It was a general shift of seeing, people who were authentic and who were genuine and showed it and had shown it for years and had earned their trust.
Huong, do you want to share a bit more about why you thought people were swinging to you in Fraser? I think, am I right in saying that you had the biggest swing in the entire country to the Greens?
I wish I could say that, but apparently Page in New South Wales. But cool. I still think that ours was the coolest campaign.
What was it? Electorate
Page isn't here to talk about their campaigns, whatever, right? So swings. Am I allowed to swear? I won't. I don't know. I don't know what the swings were. I don't know what we did. But what I can tell you is that and this is what I'm most proud of, if there was a pandemic tomorrow, because of the way we organized, we would get tens of thousands of people out into a mutual aid network within 24 hours. On my heart, I reckon that could happen because of the way we organized, the relationships we built, and no psephologist in the party would ever pick that up. And if we go around, we've got to be careful. If we go around saying that we got swings in multicultural areas, the people in this party would turn around and say, oh, Mukhtar, Rayan, we got more work for you. These are two people. They keep rolling out. They don't ever investigate what it is that me, Rayan, and Mukhtar do. But whenever they need to talk to brown people, they wheel us out, right? And so we've got to be careful who we say this to, and be careful of them running away with it during evaluation, because they're going to come to different conclusions from the people like myself, Remah, and Mehreen about what we need to do next, about being relevant to these communities as opposed to how do we get them to swing towards us more?
So it sounds like you're saying that people were shifting towards supporting the Greens in large part because of the grassroots work you were doing, or is it like I mean, I know in the campaign you were talking a lot about Palestine as well. Was that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Centered.
yeah.
Okay, well, I think the context that might be relevant is so we've got an electorate in Fraser, 100,000 voters or 120,000 voters, whatever it is. There's a section that we've got quite a strong vote in, and that's closer to the inner city, and no surprises, a little bit more well off and more white. And then there's a chunk in the middle. There's a bit of gentrification, people who can't afford to live in the inner north. They've moved out to areas like Sunshine West, which when I was growing up there, it was like mafia central. And now everybody wants the big block, you know? So I don't know where the mafia people have left, but have gone to. But and then there's another section which is really working class and dormitory, and nobody gives them a look in. And those places will vote no for marriage plebiscite and for the voice. And you can see, you know, the further out west, the stronger there's been a bit of a backlash. The Liberals are getting a bit stronger out there, not because they're any good, just because Labor have just taken us for granted for too long. The other thing is the Liberal candidate was a Vietnamese man up until, you know, 5 minutes before pre-poll. And because he had citizenship issues, he was adopted here by a white family, but he's got Vietnamese, he was a Vietnamese refugee basically. And I know this fight because I was working with, trying to get the Vietnamese government to you know, do the renunciation stuff. He got it done in time, but the Liberal Party, being the Liberal Party, was like, bad luck, we don't want you anyway. And they just installed a random Indian dude. And yeah, and so that probably worked in our favour because there's a lot of Vietnamese people in Fraser who, anecdotally, I'm not a statistician and couldn't even figure out what the swings were by booth just before this. I was just like, oh, I guess we're not talking about it because I don't know what the hell the swings were. But people will come up to me, or when on the doors, at the pre-polls, wherever I interact with them, of course I'm going to vote for you. I want to see you, Vietnamese people back Vietnamese people. So there was a high rate of that. So, you know, who knows what that has got. But again, I don't think that is as relevant as I know the strength of the relationships are in this. And I'm really excited about what happens next.
Yeah, we'll get into talking campaign tactics and organising strategies shortly. Remah, did you want to just tell us a bit more about why do you think people were swinging to you in the southern parts of your electorate? And if you have any insights on why people swung away from you in the northern parts of the electorate, I'd be interested in that too.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting in Moreton, even in the southern parts of Moreton. That's still interesting for me. Look, booths like Kirby, I think it's obvious Palestine is the main issue because there are 37%, around 37% of the population in Kirby are Muslims. And for them, Palestine was very important. And this also shows that sometimes you can campaign on everything, you know, cost of living, on housing, on climate, everything that's relevant to mainstream public. And for them, that's not what would move them. If there's something else that activates them, they would just look for this specific issue. And I think it's really helpful information for the Greens to be looking like less universal things are really important. Mainstream policies are important, but we can't pretend that these are all that matters, because for some groups, for some especially marginalized groups, they are on top of all of these things, there are some specific issues that they want to see political parties campaigning on so that they feel seen and heard. And throughout my meetings and forums with the Muslim community, it was also something else that they raised with me is they were thrilled to see someone from the community representing them within the Greens party, because for them, this is not just about Palestine. For them, representation provides a role model to the community. So sometimes we get consumed about, you know, like our messaging and our policies, and we don't really understand what does it mean for those marginalized communities when someone from that community is actually stepping up to represent them. That sends different messaging to those communities. So we can say for sure in booths like Kirby, Palestine was the main thing. Also, the presence of community groups that were backing me as a candidate, like Muslim Votes Matter, JFP to some extent, but we know that Muslim Votes Matter.
JFP is Justice for Palestine?
Justice for Palestine, yeah, that's right. Justice for Palestine, Maganjan were also heavily involved in this campaign. So it wasn't all just the Greens. The work that Muslim Voice Matter did and also Justice for Palestine helped us achieve this great result in booths like Kirby. Now, other booths like Runcorn, we're still talking about a very diverse population. I think when I looked at the data from the ABS, about 6 to 8% of the population in Runcorn, for instance, both parents were born overseas. So we're talking about highly diverse and migrant communities there. The Muslim population there is not as strong. We're talking about 6% of the population, but we achieved about like 10% on 10.5% swing towards us. Now, we campaigned heavily in Runcorn. And when I say we've campaigned, I mean in terms of door knocking and community events. Our messaging to them was focused on what we've seen from locals. They really wanted us to campaign on things like family reunion visas, and we've adopted that. We made it front and center in our campaign. So we were responding to what we were hearing on the ground. I think the result in 8 Mile Plains was particularly interesting because we haven't actually done much campaigning in 8 Mile Plains. However, I think it was the second largest swing towards the Greens in Queensland, which I think it's really, really interesting because now it is still a diverse, people from diverse backgrounds. Half of the population there are renters. And it's important when we look at those numbers. Yes, we achieved about 15% swing towards the Greens and 8 Mile Plains, but it is still in comparison with other sort of like similar renters demographics suburbs like Fairfield, for instance, we're still behind. So there's still a lot of work to be done in those suburbs. It's not like we've achieved this swing, we've done our bit. We shouldn't take our voters for granted. And I think this is the lesson because I mean, there are so many lessons. This is one of the lessons because before going into this campaign, we were only talking about the swing that we need to win Moreton. And I think we have achieved this swing, but that was assuming that we weren't losing any other votes. And we did lose those votes in the northwestern suburbs of the electorate, where, as you said, Jono, they're like more affluent, less renters. So I think those suburbs, I don't know if that was a contributing factor, but we didn't really campaign in those suburbs because of the lack of resources, and we had to make that strategic decision while we were planning. Where are we going to focus our energy? And also, when Alfred hit, we had to cancel some of the events that were scheduled for some of those suburbs. So there were like more than one factor. I can't say for sure, but we have seen swings against us in suburbs like Sherwood, Oxley, also Graceville. I don't know if the reason is simply because we didn't have any presence in those suburbs. It could be also a contributing factor. I don't know if it's because we didn't talk about the environment as much, although I think that we did talk about the environment, but it wasn't higher enough for some voters on the list of policies that we were talking about. So there were quite a few reasons or a few factors that we can consider when we are doing more analysis, closer analysis.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that point about the areas that swung against us is interesting because in some of the areas that swung towards the Greens in Moreton, your primary vote, in particular, was a lot higher than the Green Senate vote. So in particularly places like Runcorn and 8 Mile Plains that you mentioned, the vote for you as a candidate was sort of 5-6%, maybe as close as 10% higher than the actual Green Senate vote in the same booth. So there were people who were voting one for you in the lower house. And in some cases, those people were voting one for other progressive minor parties like the Indigenous Party, like the Socialist Alliance, I think, ran a candidate in the Senate. But also a lot of people voting for Australia's Voice in the Senate in booths like Kirby. So it's interesting to see that variation there. Huong, you look like you were going to
ask a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just pairing back just getting away from the election for a second, what do we think swings tell us about how people are going? Like what does the swings tell us? What swings for or swings against? And what don't they tell us? I feel like there's a lot that swings don't tell us. Um, so I just wanted to put that question to yourselves.
I think that's such a good question to pose because there's a tendency to look too closely just at the demographics in certain suburbs and just at how much the vote did or didn't change. And there are so many variables that affect people's voting decisions. I'd love to hear what Mehreen thinks as well, but my instinct is that people swing when they want change. If they're happy with the status quo, they might continue voting for the parties that they've always voted for. But
My experience
yeah,
in the western suburbs of Melbourne, so-called Melbourne, is that a lot of people go into the booth not thinking super hard about how they're going to vote. And this is why it's so important for us to be on the pre-polls, right? Because
yeah, we
something
swing
like
votes right up until they get in the booth.
we
Yeah.
swing votes, but like we swing votes at a really shallow level. Like this is not we're not touching people's hearts there.
No,
We're
it's
just
not a
like,
deep level of engagement. They're
well,
not, yeah.
they're deciding whether they want, tacos or burritos at this point. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-mm.
And maybe they saw a Greens volunteer and they're really friendly. So I don't know how much swings tell us when the heart of people doesn't seem to be in their vote when they're at the booths. Some people are, and they're the decideds, right? They're probably our baseline people. So genuine question, what do we think swings tell us? And, for a second, let's think about what swings don't tell us about
And at the risk of dominating this
what we
conversation
need
too
to
much,
do as a movement.
one thing that interested me was that in the Griffith electorate, which is sort of partly inner city, West End, South Brisbane, Greens Heartland, and then spreads further out into the suburbs, the swings against Max Chandler Mather in Greens Heartland of West End were pretty minor. Those people who've been voting Greens for years and have come on board with the sort of broad vision and the values of the movement still largely stuck with Max, despite a huge wave of negative attacks, despite an absolute torrent of negative campaigning. Whereas some of the areas that he'd picked up in the last election, where the suburbs had sort of swung to Max partly on the basis of this big, strong campaign, maybe they hadn't been shifted at a deeper level philosophically and politically, and as you said, in terms of their hearts, they voted for Max because he had this big presence and this sort of very effective door knocking campaign, but he hadn't fundamentally changed the values of those communities. Mehreen, did you have anything to add to this? I just want to
I think that's such a good question. Yeah, that's such a good question, Hong. And I think swings by themselves, are just numbers and probably don't tell us too much unless we look at what's actually happening in the community. What is the context of that swing we're looking at? But I do think in Western Sydney and Southwestern Sydney, the swings did tell us that the communities there were sick and tired of being taken for granted. And there were many people in the community who were talking to people about that. So, like Remah, you said Muslim votes here were very strong in a couple of electorates, Watson and Blaxland. And we worked really well with them. And that says a lot about the connections that the campaign teams and our candidates made with them. But also, as Remah, you said, being someone from the community, as a Muslim migrant woman and having those long-term connections, it was just really easy. It wasn't a new relationship we were forming. I knew so many of those people, had known them for years, even before I got into politics. So I think those swings do tell a story about the Gaza effect. They do tell a story about engagement with community, about strategic voting. Even I was not surprised, I guess, but it was really good to see that even where there were two, like Watson and Blaxland, there were massive campaigns that Muslim votes ran. They had two prominent candidates. The Greens still got quite big swings towards us, even though those two candidates, got swings as well. Yeah, absolutely. I know Jocelyn is wanting to say something, and it'll be great, Jocelyn, if you come back when the question, when we open up for conversation. So I think that's what the swings tell us. And I think there's the broader effect as well, because we've in our office, looked at booths in Adelaide and in Perth as well. And the ones that have the biggest swings are the ones with migrant communities and culturally diverse communities. So I think there's a broader picture. And so there's a trend, I think, this time around. It's not just one suburb or one booth. And we were having a conversation just this morning in our office about door knocking. And I'm just kind of trying to equate this to door knocking. But, like door knocking in itself is not I think the Greens have put a lot of emphasis on door knocking over a long period of time. And yes, it's a good strategy. But in Western Sydney, Southwestern Sydney, we did not have the resources to door knock. There was very little door knocking that went on. And even without that, we had these massive swings. So I think that's something I want to put in the mix to say there are other ways which our candidates work, are present in the community, we're making long-term connections, which is the way to build a movement. And for me, always it has been about movement building. Sure, we are an electoral party and we want to win seats, but without movement building, nothing matters, honestly.
Well said. So let's talk a bit more, and I'd love to hear from Remah first on this, about how these campaigns differed a little bit from orthodox Greens campaign strategies and tactics in some of our key seats. Because I'm sure a lot of us have seen how the Greens campaign, when they've got a winnable seat and a lot of money behind a candidate and a sort of strong party focus. But I think neither Fraser nor Moreton, and certainly not those Western Sydney seats, were necessarily treated as winnable by the Greens party. And so you guys had to be a bit more creative in terms of how you reached people and how you made most efficient uses of resources. Remah, what do you think was different about your campaign compared to some of the other Greens campaigns you've seen?
We didn't have money. No, look, well, first of all, I just want to touch quickly on the question, because Huong did raise such an important question about the swings. I think the swings just provide us with data, and data is subject to different interpretations based on where you look at this data. So it can't tell you stories based on the information that you're looking at in terms of the scope or the lens that you're looking at. So it can tell us stories, lots and lots of stories, and these stories are different depending on where you're looking at them. Now, in terms of our tactics, or how different our campaign was, first of all, I just want to say, actually, the Moreton campaign was considered winnable. When I first put my hand up, or when I was first approached, that was a winnable campaign. However, this changed after the state election, and the Moreton campaign was sort of dropped from the winnable seats, even rhetorically, let's just say. I mean, it was never winnable in the sense that they're going to put a lot of resources into it, but even rhetorically, the Moreton campaign was dropped. And to be honest, that gave us a lot of freedom. We felt sort of liberated because we did not have to be under whatever like orthodox campaigning tactics or strategies. We were left on our own, and that gave us a lot of freedom and creativity. I think the most important thing about the Moreton campaign is that it was unapologetically anti-establishment. And I did say it right from the beginning, I don't want this campaign to just be another Greens platform or my platform. I don't want it to just be another Greens platform, not because there's anything wrong with it, but because of the population in Moreton. It is the most diverse electorate here in Queensland, and I still believe that whenever we are in an election cycle, some communities miss out, and it's almost always those migrant communities and marginalized communities end up missing out, because we tend to focus on the wider appeal, on the universal issues. But again, they are not the most important things sometimes for those marginalized communities. And this was the promise of this campaign, is that we are going to go out and connect with those communities, find out what matters to them, and then bring it front and center in this campaign. We also campaigned on, Palestine for us. In fact, Palestine for us was a completely different question. It wasn't like, are we talking enough about Palestine? It's like, can we make sure that I'm not portrayed as a single issue candidate because of my own identity? And of course, there's a genocide. My people are being genocided right in front of our eyes. So it's really important for me to talk enough about Palestine, because I owe it to the Palestinian people, when there is a genocide at that scale, to at least use a platform to raise awareness. So we did that without any hesitation, although at some stage in the campaign, because of all the messaging that we were receiving. And Palestine wasn't the only thing that we were campaigning on. Of course, we campaigned on all sort of issues, and even the universal policies that the Greens were talking about, like the entitlement to Medicare, like capping rent increases, like the climate, and all of these things. Towards the end of the campaign, even I was asking myself questions like, I don't want to pigeonhole myself and keep talking about Palestine when, in fact, what's happening in Palestine is actually getting worse. And we'll probably talk more about this later, if you want, about like how this differed from the messaging of the Greens when it comes to Palestine, and how the messaging on Palestine sort of like was nearly absent from some platforms, from certain candidates or even elected reps. But this campaign, the promise of our campaign, was to give voice to those who feel powerless, to those who feel voiceless. This is not just Palestinian and Muslim communities. That was across the board in terms of people from the disability community, marginalized communities of color. We also talked about trans justice. So we felt that we have a responsibility to amplify those voices. And that was the promise of this campaign. It was the balance that we needed to strike. How much do we balance the mainstream, the universal issues with those without compromising on focusing on these issues that matter to those specific groups?
Yeah, and just before I go to Huong, I think tactically one thing that was interesting about Moreton was that we did do quite a bit of door knocking in certain areas where we had enough volunteers, but we didn't come close to door knocking anywhere near the whole electorate. But we also had a lot of community barbecues, a lot of you did a forum on disability justice, partnering with some of the other branches and candidates, which, that wasn't necessarily the top line issue that even voters were raising with us at the doors, but you felt ethically it was important to center disability justice in the conversation. So you had a whole family day event where you had this policy forum around disability justice. And I think that was a big difference between you and some of the other campaigns, where sometimes the Greens campaign will say, okay, what are the top 3 issues that voters are talking about? Let's just talk about them. Whereas you were saying, no, there's this other stuff, family reunion visas and immigration issues, et cetera, et cetera. And you made a point of talking about that stuff quite a lot more. How about you, Huong? Were you, I mean, I don't think you did a huge amount of door knocking in your electorate, but you did a lot of other
Crazy. We've been door knocking for like 18 months, man.
How much, do you have a rough idea of, did you get the whole electorate done or?
No, gosh, no. I don't think that's a good use of time. We were door knocking. Someone else will have the numbers, like 8,000 MIs, something boring like that. But we also had in Fraser in October 2023 our local government election. So we had focused on the greener parts to make sure we had the best chance of electing local councillors, and we had our most successful ever. I think we got up to about 7,000 MIs at that point. But there's a half-life of door knocking, I feel.
MI is meaningful interaction, for those who aren't familiar with the terminology.
It is unironically called that, but really, if you talk to someone on the doors on a list, a door knocking list,
it's not always meaningful, is it?
A white boy sophologists only want to know if you gauge whether the voter is going to vote for the Greens or not. And I don't, again, with the swings, what is that telling us about anything, really? But aside from that, just thinking about what Remah was saying, I wasn't super concerned about the messaging that we were using. I kind of trusted that our party was mature enough to kind of do the headline stuff, top tier stuff, etc. Every time we interacted with community, and I'm going to say the bulk of our volunteers didn't do this. The bulk of our volunteers were door knocking, were putting up placards, there was a core group of us who were doing the stalls, going out to places where community were that we hadn't ever reached people before, mosques, churches, temples. And my intention and success, I think, at each of those was to find out map out how these people organize themselves. There's a massive temple just down the road from me. Understanding how they interact with each other and how they view themselves in the world. But from a Greens perspective, kind of touching their hearts in the sense of building trust with them, not going, hey, look at how great our policies are, saying, oh, there's an issue you've got. What do you think we can do about that? Why do you think that's the case? A really great example is I went to my first ever service at a mosque, and wear good socks, people, because you're not supposed to wear shoes in there, and wear shoes that don't have horrible buckles, because you'll be standing there forever embarrassing yourself whilst everybody's, you know, taking their slip-on shoes, slipping on and slipping off. But I understood that Sunshine Mosque, most of them were Labor members. Right? By the time I'd finished the service and chatted to people, I knew all the key committee people, and they were all dudes. I spoke to all the women that held the place together and do all the admin and do, you know everybody and who's who in that mosque. And I also knew they're pissed off about the Australian government not taking enough action on Palestine. Yeah. And so I'm like, yo, that is like, who cares about what the swings were? Let's go in there over the next 12 months and build a relationship so they connect the dots about the fact that they're in a party paying their dues or not. Who knows? I'm 100% sure they're stacking in there. You can quote me on that and sue me for it, because then it'll expose them, because they are stacking. And these people don't make a connection between their membership of the Labor Party and having any fucking influence on the elected representatives' position on Palestine, and, you know, not sanctioning Israel and running cover for the fact that there's a active genocide that we're sending weapons components to, you know, like all this kind of crap. And I'm just like, mate, that's the game changer right there. You know?
Can I just pick up on something that you and I were talking about the other day? And I think Remah and I have had similar conversations in the past, which is that often, particularly political parties, but will tend to try to engage with these new migrant communities by just talking to the president of the committee, or like the imam, or whoever is sort of the hierarchical, perceived as a hierarchical.
They should keep doing that. They should keep doing that, because that's how we're going to win, not doing that.
Yeah, right. And I think it varies, right? Like, because there are some communities that are heavily influenced by some of those, whether they're religious leaders or, committee presidents or whatever. But often, as you've said, there are other people who they're actually the real community leaders, because they're organizing on the ground, and they're the people that you were working with.
Yeah, but also stop for a second and think about these people. Once you've met them, what the hell are the Greens offering them? Absolutely nothing. So I have to be in there trying to make a case for what makes us relevant in their lives, or the opportunity, and I have to then create a space within our party to make sure that when these people do find a political home in the Greens, they don't suddenly get put off by the white boy psephologists who tell them to go gather meaningful interactions. You know what I'm saying? I want to just like share a quick anecdote, because I didn't get to say it anywhere else. During so pre-poll started on the 22nd of April, and on the 17th of April there was a shooting in Footscray. Now Footscray is a suburb right in the heart of where Greens, you know, heartland is in this electorate. And the shooting was of the police shooting a young Somali man, homeless. And my understanding of what I've gathered from community is that he was, you know, he would never even ask you for money. He'd just bum a cigarette off you. Really, never really said much. Well known because he frequented the area. I didn't even know if he lives here, because his family come from the northern suburbs. And that happened. Absolute radio silence from the Labor Party, but it was their law and order bullshit that made the Footscray like a special fucking area that the police can just like
more police enforcement. Yeah.
And a week before he'd been shot, the police had actually put out a strong arming, you know, we've got Operation fucking kill the black guys or something. And then they took that it wasn't in those words, but it was some of the effect, and they took it down the day that he got shot. Now, the difference between the way that I campaigned and somebody else is like a week before that shooting, I had walked the entire length of all the shops in Footscray, not only to put my posters up, but ask, hey, how's business? What's going on? You know, who are you? Who are your people? Well, because these issues are not new, you know, and there's a massive tension against gentrification, but also for like community pride. And there's like, you know, you've got to understand too, my parents are refugees, and everybody, like people who, you know, I hope they don't think it's a party trick. It actually helps me understand that, you know, 30 years ago, it was our Vietnamese people being criminalized and racialized and locked up in disproportionate numbers because we were caught up in heroin and other things. And now it's the South Sudanese and other African communities. And these very same business owners in Footscray, these Vietnamese ones that have stuck around, they know that when the police come, nothing fucking changes. And then the police go, it becomes antisocial again. And yeah, and it just, and then after the shooting, I went back to all those shop owners and like, hey, how you feeling? Is this okay? You know, like, what do you think should happen next? And that's my next project. Like, how we as a community organize ourselves so there is safety, there is services instead of cops. But I can't have this conversation within the party.
Yeah,
You know,
well, I
more,
do. I
yeah.
want to just go to
Jono.
Mehreen. Yeah, jump in, mate.
Yeah, thanks. So I was just going to say a little bit about the point that you raised earlier, which is about, and I guess I'll specifically talk about the Muslim community building relationships with the so-called people in positional power, which is mainly like men. And, I have steered clear away from that for many years. I have given my advice to the white dudes in the party to not do that. But, who wants to listen to a Muslim woman? What does a Muslim migrant woman know anyway? And some of these people have stood like with Mark Latham, for instance. Like why would we engage with people? It's and so it for me it's always been grassroots and people and the one good thing that there were many good things that came out of Muslim votes and Muslim vote matters is that they did say they were grassroots and they also, from what I understand, did not engage with those people in so-called positional power. In these big organizations like the imams councils and all of those. You keep your relationships cordial when you have to, but that doesn't mean that you work closely with people who I think many of them have been very co-opted by labor over a long period of time, that proximity to power, and I'll say it openly, is what people like. And as a migrant, I understand it to some extent, because when you come here with nothing, no legitimacy, no contacts, you feel like someone is paying you attention. I kind of get that. But it shouldn't be our way of operating to then build close relationships with that proximity to power. So I think that's something that I've been doing very differently, and I hope that the white men in our party, finally listen to what all of us are saying.
Mehreen, how do you do that as a senator? Because one thing that occurred to me is I'm not sure if I could organize this well if I didn't live in the area that I ran in.
Well, it's not easy, hey, as New South Wales is huge.
Yeah.
But I think it's just being who I am and the connections that I have in those communities, which and I guess like deliberately building those connections, because like you two, like I said, in Western Sydney, and that's another thing that I think in New South Wales and possibly elsewhere we need to talk about. Like our membership is low still. We don't have the structures that have been built up over years because of the resources and the money that have been put into inner city. And I think for me, it was pretty sad to see this time around that although, as an election strategy, and there was a lot of push from our office that we had Western Sydney, 5 seats in Western Sydney, which were our growth seats, we still weren't given the resources to be able to actually grow. And it was on the back of our candidates, our teams, and our office that we were able to spend so much time there. Like there are hundreds of members, for instance, hundreds and hundreds of members and volunteers in the inner cities. Why, what I would have liked is for those volunteers to go to Western Sydney and campaign there. And they would have loved to do that, I think. But it was holding on to those resources in areas which we really didn't improve anything, except I think Graindler is an exception, where a very staunch brown woman ran very hard on Palestine. This was the Prime Minister's electorate, and did really well. So, I think there's so many lessons we've got to learn about the resource distributions in this party and how we actually connect with communities, I guess, who, like, I think, Remah, you said it earlier, who need more representation.
Remah, did you
Not
have
being
any?
represented.
Did you have anything to add to this? I want to come back to that question about resourcing as well.
Yeah, look, I think both are important, although my connections are more with grassroots. Some community leaders still like to be involved in those discussions, and I wouldn't alienate them simply because they are community leaders. I would still engage them in any form of discussion, but the true conversations that are happening on the ground, they have to happen with with community members. And I don't think that we should focus on one. So, some decision making in some communities are hierarchical, and I do understand that. Even in those communities, even if we go and talk with community leaders, we should never ignore communities themselves. Even I've seen it throughout the campaign. Certain communities, they're like, well, you know what, Remah, we love you. We're just going to make some phone calls and bring you some hundreds of voters to vote for you. I'm like, you know what? I want to have a forum with them. I want them to see me and understand what I'm standing for. And this is one of the important things, that I didn't want to trick people into voting for me without knowing who I really am. I ended up pissing off some people, pissing off as in, like, this is what I'm standing for, and copying some flack here and there. But you know what? People deserve to have an honest candidate, an honest politician who are upfront about their beliefs, priorities, what they're campaigning on. There is no point tricking people into voting for us because I think that we're standing for the wrong thing. No, this is who we are and this is what we're standing for. And it's really the lesson, one of the lessons that I drew from this campaign is that even those who tell you we're going to get hundreds of people to vote for you, it's still important for us to meet with them and talk to them about our priorities and what we're campaigning on. So both are important. I wouldn't alienate community leaders simply because they are community leaders. I would still talk to them and offer them the respect that they love to see. But at the same time, go back to the community.
Well said.
This is my lesson.
I'm mindful of time. I did just want to pose that question that I think sort of Mehreen alluded to a little bit, which is just that if we don't feel like the Greens are putting sufficient support or resources towards connecting with some of these outer suburban and culturally diverse communities, why is that? What's going wrong within the Australian Greens as an institution or an organism that we keep missing this opportunity? Is it simply that decision making is too heavily centralized and that the one or two people aren't on board with that strategy, or is it that actually decision making power is fairly dispersed and lots of different people have input into strategy, but most of them are white Australian and so they don't value it in that way? I think a lot of people probably watching this chat will be saying, well, isn't it obvious that we should be doing more outreach and work connecting with these marginalized communities? Why isn't that happening? Mehreen, I'd love to know what you think of this, but yeah, you've been at this a while, and I know Huong, you have as well, trying to get the party to put more resources into some of these communities. Why isn't it happening?
So a few things. I'll start with New South Wales. The party grew from the inner city. That's where it's kind of has the numbers, the power base. So that's kind of one reason. We just keep concentrating, or Grendler's whenever, that's the Prime Minister's seat, or Bill to win, and then Sydney, which is Tanya Plibersek's seat. We're building to win there. I think demographics are changing in both those seats, and the people who we thought were Greens voters, not as many of them are there. Like the Sydney I think is a very ripe Teal seat. So if Tanya Plibersek goes, it'll probably be a Teal candidate that might win there. Grendler is a different story in a sense that its boundaries have shifted quite a bit, and it's taken a little bit of the kind of southern part, which is more related to migrant communities. But I think that was one reason. But, it's been a long time since the party started, right? And things have really shifted. I think there is a lot to be said about what the party is. It's still a very white party, right? So people would gravitate towards that. And I guess the third thing I would say is, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but there is too much emphasis probably on winning seats. So Western Sydney, obviously, we're not even close to winning a seat there, but that doesn't matter. These are marginalized communities who want support, who are looking for someone to talk about their issues, whether that be racism, whether that be issues of family reunion, whether they be issues of, Palestine or climate. They care about the climate as well, right? It's not only white people who care about the climate or environmental protection. And that's where I think something needs to shift. And I've been kind of inching towards that for a long time, but this time I did get that opportunity. We did get that opportunity big time to have a really big presence in Western Sydney, with our candidates, our party, our members. Just one example is that we organized a big launch party in Western Sydney. Just with 1 week's notice, we got 400 people in Parramatta Town Hall. Like incredible. It was incredible. We had barbecues. I've always had iftars there. We've always been participating in community events and fairs, but we could do it in a bigger way this time, even though we had minimal resources, just because we said these are growth seats. We just wanted to back off. I'm doing this. That's what it was. So I'm hoping, I mean, I'm not just hoping, but I will not back off from this. Can I say that? These are communities that are, that are my communities. I'm part of this party as well. We just don't have to grow in inner city areas. And I think we need to relook at strategies of, winning seats but also growing the movement. They're not mutually exclusive, actually. They're just not. It's a longer term view that we need to take. Change requires you to work on, with a longer term kind of mission, honestly.
Well
I want to
said.
say that a different way as well. If there's too much emphasis on winning seats, it can come at the expense of building movements.
Yeah,
And I just want to underline that because
yeah,
we can get people elected, but if they're going to be another white lawyer, no thanks.
yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like if they're just going to be like reformists and go into the parliament and not like wreck shit, no thanks. And we leave ourselves too open to the whims of those swing voters, what kind of world we're going to build if we think that we go too hard with winning elections. I also wanted to say too that you named Hannah Thomas, Remah, myself, and Mehreen. We wouldn't go any different, but anything but hard on Palestine, even if we lost votes, even if it swung against us. Like, what is this bullshit? Who cares if it won us swings? We were going to say what we needed to say about ending the occupation of Palestine, whether it was popular or not. But my heart tells me, like, it's very heartening to know that that would have been a really big part because we were all unflinching about it. But also, on pre-poll, seeing thousands and thousands of people over the 2 week period, the number of people who gave me shit, I could count on one hand for wearing a keffiyeh every day. The number of people who stopped for selfies. One guy was just like, I wasn't even going to vote for anyone. And I saw you with that, and I'm going to vote for you. And then he came out and asked me for a selfie. Like,
Awesome.
people are about it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
we see when the Greens are bold, people will respond. And
Yeah, exactly the same experience for me, Hong. Exactly the same experience. Not even on my hand can I count people who came up and hated on me. Not, they were less than that. But hundreds of others who came and hugged and cried,
Yep,
like cried with tears.
actually,
That's what this election was about, honestly.
I might just go to Rima really quick, but I just wanted to let everyone else who's participating in this call know that I've opened up the chat so you can post questions that you have for our
Can I make
panelists
a
in the
request?
chat window. Yeah, fire away.
If we're going to get people to ask questions out loud, can we make sure that they're people of color?
I don't think we'll have time for out loud questions. I'll just see questions coming in the chat and
It's
I'll
just like
select a few.
post-election, all I've heard are like white folks and their
Sure.
takes, and I'm like, we don't. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. I'll do my best to prioritize questions from people from the press backgrounds. We'll see how we go. Rima, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Look, nothing much to add. I just want to say that the Greens is a white institution, and that's not just in the leadership, even the membership of the party. And when we approach those migrant communities, the first thing that comes to mind for me, like for me personally, if a white person approaches me and be like, hey, I want to invite you and your community to this political party, we're trying to establish relationship with you, the first thing that comes to mind, you're just looking at ways how we can serve you as a political party, how our community can be of service to your political party. If I don't see that represented in terms of the membership and the leadership of that party, this is what it's going to come to, how my community is going to be of service to you. And I think this is the question for the Greens. And also, even when we put people of color forward for seats, A, they need to be winnable seats, and B, we don't leave them without resources, because that turns into a burden. Like, they're burdened on top of everything else that they have to go through. And for the Greens as a political party, if we are saying that we're going to support people of color, we want to support marginalized communities to be representatives, we actually need to put enough resources behind them and not burden them with this. I understand that the resources within the party are limited, but why is it always marginalized communities have to miss out? Just questions for the Greens to grapple with. And I also commend everything Huong and Mehreen said.
Just before we take questions from the crew, I might just ask each of you to just share, like, looking ahead, what do you hope Green supporters will focus their energy on over the coming months? Is there anything in particular now that there isn't another election right around the corner? What do we need to be doing more of right now?
I can say just be out in the community and getting involved. There are so many community groups out there that are desperate for volunteers, and we need to be out there filling those gaps. Also, there are several movements on the ground that are putting a lot of pressure on our government in so many ways when it comes to Palestine, to the climate, to gendered violence against women. There are so many movements. We can't be absent from those movements on the ground. And if I may add one thing, please talk to people about preferential voting. And I mean it.
Yeah.
You laugh.
Yeah.
It is serious. The number of people who came to me after they voted and be like, "We love you, we support you, sir, but we just had to put you second." And I'm going, we really need to be a bit in terms of educating people about preferential voting. Please make sure that your neighbor understands it. The other parents whose kid plays with yours in the playground, when you go and talk to your colleagues, everyone, I mean it. Preferential voting is very important, but a lot of people don't understand it, and we've lost a lot of votes also at the booths where our scrutineers were like, we saw this number of votes that were just had one Remah Naji and hadn't ticked any other boxes. So really, if we are wanting to make change, we need to be out in the community, joining community groups, movements. And if we are serious about electoral politics, at the very least, let's educate people about preferential voting.
Just on that real quick, Remah, I'm continually struck every election by the fact that areas that have higher proportions of people who speak a language other than English at home also tend to have higher informal rates. And I see someone else has just made that point in the comments as well, that a lot of people don't understand how the voting system works, and then their votes don't get counted because they don't fill out their ballot in accordance with the rules, which really sucks. Mehreen, did you have anything you wanted members and Green supporters to be thinking about and working towards in the near future?
Yes, I do. So I've heard from a lot of members since the election about the slogan that we had, which was keep Dutton out and get Labour to act, was about the two other parties and not about us.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have said, I kind of have reflected on that a bit too and think they are right. So we're not a distraction from the mainstream. Like, we have our own identity. We should have our own identity. And right now there is even more pressure than before from the mainstream media, from obviously from Labour, for us to kind of get out of the way, as Prime Minister Albanese put it, or this pressure on, we should go back to our environmental roots. And I guess what I want members to do is to because this moment demands more from us, not less. What I would like supporters and members to do is to make sure that we stay, or we become a more radical party. Can I just lay that on the table? That we do not take a step backward from, positions and the way we do things in terms of grassroots and in terms of pushing back on mediocre, timid agendas of the Labour Party. I mean, what it looks like to me is that Labour, because it's won so many seats of the Liberals, are going to move more to the centre. I mean, I don't know when last time they were on the left, but, this is maybe they move more to the right. The Liberals will probably, maybe, learn their lesson and move less towards the right. So there is a lot of space for us to actually, to actually do things to progress the agenda that people have backed us in there to do. So let's make sure that, apart from, I agree with everything that Remah has said, support people who who are willing to do that, who are willing to do that in the party. And there are a lot of people of color and women of color who are incredible. And you see some of them right in front of you in Remah and Huong, and there's many others. I think it is time to support them to move the Greens in a direction which supports more movement building.
Which touches on a question that Toyo has posed in the chat about what advice the panelists have on convincing your local branches to build stuff that isn't just about contesting elections. And do you have any tips for how to get your local Greens groups on board with this broader picture of movement building as opposed to pure electioneering? Huong, did you have something to say to this?
Yeah, just do it. Don't wait. You're talking to the wrong people if you have to convince them.
If they're not immediately on board with it, find other people to organize with.
Just fucking do it. I'll tell you what, the thing that has been so crystal clear to me is we are in apocalypses right now. Like the fact that we live in Australia, buffered by the banality of everyday life, we look away, we don't have to really hurt too hard. But that's not going to be the case all the time. Food security systems are collapsing. This climate catastrophe, the extinction crisis is overconsumption. We're choking the planet with waste and pollution. We're absolutely fucked. And that's not even starting to think about, all right, the military power of China or the fact of AI taking over our arts and humanity. We're not even touching that. We're not ready. If we do nothing else, I might end up regretting saying this, but I don't care what happens in the next election. If anything we're doing right now, if you're wondering, there's a lot of talk about community, and I think I'm really mindful that there's a lot of people who want to be on our state councils and want to be on our Victorian campaign committees, right? And they're all fucking white, and they're all scratching their heads and making the right noises about, oh, how come there's no diversity? But fuck, why would I want to hang out with you guys? No, honestly, when I have to go in and have to fight for this idea that we need to, if you're not building a mutual aid network, something that can be mobilized tomorrow, and we had 40,000 from the party finally when we begged them for it, but aside from that, we raised 140,000, yeah, but we didn't have an office. Do you know why? Because we couldn't afford it. No one's going to give you commercial real estate for 6 months at peanuts. And so what we had to do was build relationships with a Borderlands cooperative, a social justice community development cooperative, and they let us use the place for free every Wednesday night. We worked with a crew who does circular economy stuff, rescuing office furniture and stationery, and they recognized the grassroots work that we were doing, and they had a massive space that we could do our volunteer training in. Money, clearly, Mac and Wills, it does not win elections, people do. And so my strength test is, if there was a pandemic tomorrow, are we going to be able to mobilize tens of thousands of people to feed ourselves if our national food supply chains fall over, or we run out of toilet paper? Yeah.
Well said. Hey, I'm sorry to cut you short because we've got a bunch of great questions coming through the chat. I'm concerned we're not going to have time to get through all of them. I did just want to, I thought there was one great question early on from, I think it was Eric, about the fact that it seemed like the Greens, as a sort of the leadership of the Greens, moved away a little bit from this really staunch Palestine position towards the end of the campaign because they felt like they were getting backlash. Mehreen, I'm not sure how much you can tell us about this, or whether, was that true? Did the party make a conscious decision that Adam Bant, and sort of in terms of our headline media messaging, that they would talk a little bit less about Palestine and a little bit more about dental care? And how do we ensure that that shift doesn't continue over the next few months or the next term of parliament?
So yeah, listen, I'll be very honest. There was no conscious decision made about that I knew of, or any collective decision. But it did happen at the leadership level. Like I said, I did not move an inch away. I got even stronger. And this is the thing about Palestine and Gaza. Of course, it is about what is happening there, but it had a huge impact on what was happening here. Apart from the trauma of people, there were laws passed to crack down on protesters, on pro-Palestinian protesters. Individuals were vilified and attacked. Artists, writers, academics. In universities, there were draconian anti-protest policies taken up and stopped. So this had a real world impact on people here as well. And I think the way that those decisions don't happen again is, I guess, more collectivism in how leadership operates, more of a shared distributed model. Like, we've had discussions, Jono, you and I, for years, and some others, in how the leadership is actually elected or selected we had a plebiscite not very long ago of members to say, where we put up the question of where the leadership should be elected by members. There have been other models proposed, or co-leaders and other things. So I think we need to, no matter what the model is, we need to have a more collective way of decision making, even in the leadership team. And I'll be very honest with that. So things do need to change there. And to make sure that these things don't happen again, but also more involvement with members. These are decisions made on, maybe, I don't know how that decision was made, focus groups, or what the media might be saying. And I think we need to be influenced a lot less by the right-wing media. I think there is still a tendency.
Don't let them write our playbook, and don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well said.
And don't let Sky and the Australian write the playbook. In fact, I would like our party room to not go on Sky at all. Why would we? Why would we legitimize a bloody racist media organization the most racist media organization in this country?
Well said. I'm
On this, I'm just going to
Remah.
add something on this question. Actually, the absence of Palestine from the platform of some elected reps and candidates did not go unnoticed by a lot of people who are passionate about Palestine. And I was asked personally about this, and I said I can't answer for those elected members or candidates, but it did not go unnoticed. And while I do understand that there is like true election anxiety that was happening during the election campaign and cycle, also there are some members who wanted answers from the party. What I would have loved to see from the Greens is actually do a better job at explaining Australia's role in the genocide that's happening in Palestine. So we could have talked more about the role of Pine Gap spy base that we have in Alice Springs, and how that sends military intelligence information that's being used directly by Israeli offense forces. I would have loved to see more about the weapons components, and even naming those manufacturers that are here in this country. I would have loved to see more talk about what does it mean for Australia to take a political position on Palestine. Unfortunately, we were subject to a lot of attacks from groups like Advance, and some of these attacks were framing the Greens as anti-Semitic, etc. We haven't seen a serious pushback from the Greens to counter these sort of attacks. We just left them. I haven't seen any serious counter argument to those. What we could have allocated some resources by the Greens, some of those billboards or digital ads that we put millions of dollars towards them. Why didn't we allocate some of that to actually counter those arguments? Because it's like with previous attacks to the Greens, we just kind of like leaving them don't neutralize those attacks. They actually kind of like leave them out unchecked, and those play a significant role in the subconscious of people. Those messaging, there's a whole body of literature within psychology that talks about these messages and what they do with undecided voters and those who are disengaged. So probably a better thing to do is, instead of just ignoring it, or let's just say let's focus on dental and Medicare instead of talking about Palestine. Yes, talk about dental and Medicare, nothing against it, but at the same time, do not ignore that here there are a lot of people who are passionate about Palestine, and also Australia plays a big role. We have a platform that we could have used it in a better way when it comes to that. This is just specifically about the question about Palestine.
No, well said, Remah. Really well said. And I'm just feeling so much regret that we don't have time for longer discussions, because there are so many great questions and comments coming in via the chat now. One thing that I'm struck by reading some of the comments and hearing some of what we've been discussing is that whether it's debates about how the party allocates resources and who it puts forward as spokespeople and candidates, or whether it's debates about what issues we focus on or how we organize, what we're really running up against consistently is the fact that the Greens base doesn't have a lot of direct democratic control over the really big decisions that shape our party. Like some of the questions coming through in the chat are reflecting a sort of sense of disempowerment and a sense that although the party says we practice grassroots participatory democracy, on the really big questions, our members don't have a vote. And that includes not just how we run campaigns and what issues we talk about, but also how our MPs vote in the Senate, for example. So in the coming term of government, the Greens are going to have to make a lot of difficult decisions about which Labor bills to support, which Labor bills to hold out on. And voters won't get any say, but even Greens party members won't largely get any say on how our senators vote in Parliament. So when I'm thinking ahead to answer my own question that I posed earlier about what do I hope Greens supporters focus on over the next few months, I hope people think a lot about what Mehreen said about direct election of leader, but also about how we can push for a more democratic party in general, so that we identify what are the biggest and most important decisions for our movement in terms of how resources are allocated, how we build power, how we wield power within Parliament, and how do we make sure that our membership and our Greens volunteers and support base, including all the people who aren't party members, how do all those people who've campaigned for us and rocked up for us at election time, how do they get a say on how the party wields power? We've only got literally a few minutes left, so I apologize to everyone who's been asking questions. As I mentioned, once we wrap up the formal part of today's call, we're going to keep the discussion going and people can hang out online and keep chatting. I'll facilitate the discussion for a little bit longer. But right now, I'd just like to invite each of our speakers to share a few final words. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes each. What do you want to leave people with? What do you think we need to be reflecting on going forward? What do you hope people do differently next time? Whatever you want to say, floor is yours. Mehreen, did you want to go first?
Okay, I think I've said so much already. But you know what? Listen, I've been a member of the Greens for 20 years. I joined the Greens in National Heartland in a regional area in New South Wales, a beautiful town called Port Macquarie, because my values aligned very closely with the Greens. And how I found the Greens was through my work in the community. I was working with the refugee support group. I was working with an environmental protection like a group which was doing hands-on work on the ground, and a few other things. And we are a party which which has its heart in the right place. Could I say that? But I think how should I say, we haven't really changed with the times, if I can say that. Like we really still quite quick to be drawn into this argument and not push back on it in terms of, oh, our roots were environmental. Honestly, I'm an environmental engineer. My whole 25 years of my career have just been climate, environment protection, and sustainability. But I joined the Greens when Bob Brown and Kerry Nettle are only two senators in Parliament heckled George Bush Jr. They didn't shy away from social issues or anti-war. They didn't shy away from, justice for refugees when Bob Brown was the lone voice. So those are our roots. Let's not fall into this trap of trying to defend ourselves when media attack us or when Labour Party or whoever attack us. I want us to be bold and courageous in who we are. And, our identity at this time has to embrace the four pillars. It has to embrace, climate, social justice, and, human rights. We have to be that party, because like I said before, anyone who tells you that you can't talk about that you can talk about environment without talking about the actual systems that are destroying the environment is kind of lying to you. And for me, we are the strongest when we are grassroots, and we have to make sure that for peace, for justice, for democracy, we have to dissent. We have to dissent. And this is not mission creep for the Greens. This is the future of the Greens.
Well said, Mehreen. Thanks. Huong, did you have a few final words you wanted to share?
Sure. I just want to, what do I want to say? Oh, just personally, I don't know how you'll take this, but I'm going to try really, really hard to only work with POC in our in our party, and I'm going to see where that takes us. And I also want to say out loud too that it's not any person of color that we're looking for. We're looking for people who understand solidarity, grassroots, turning up for people in a way that builds the strength of, and resilience of a collective network of activists. And yeah, and that may or may not include a podcast. And that since everyone's doing it. But yeah, I want to do a deep dive in that. And for folks that feel offended, which might happen, I don't want to upset y'all, but that I want to hear people of color's voices first. I'd just love for you to reflect on that. You know, why someone like me who's been 20 years in the party, who's been an MP, who's run these before, who keeps being overlooked for positions because you all want to hire white people who live in the inner city of Melbourne before you hire someone who actually knows how to talk to community and build a movement. I just want you all to reflect on that, because I know a couple of people here are probably going to be on the next Victorian State Council, and a lot of you have big roles in the party. And if you're feeling excluded, imagine what it's like to be a person of color in this party. That's all I got to say.
Thanks. Well said. I really hope you and Remah start a podcast together. That would be amazing. I'd subscribe to that.
Voices for a
I love
podcast.
that.
But we need
Can
a
you
white person to
imagine?
do production.
Sky News would have a field day. Oh man. Remah, I'll give the final word to the Palestinian woman.
Thank you. Look, I just want to sort of build on what both Mehreen and Huong said. And look, before joining the Greens, I've always admired the Greens for many reasons, and I'm still aligned with the values of the Greens. And when we say for the Green supporters, like, grapple with these questions, we say it because what we've experienced is not nothing. It is like, this is serious. And if we are to move forward as a political party and as a movement connected to the ground, we really need to be listening to those marginalized voices. And what I want to say, what I want every Green supporter I want you guys to sit with this question. How do we challenge that concept of mainstream appeal and actively shift it so that voters can see the strength in those non-Western looking and sounding candidates without forcing those candidates to dilute their core values? I'm just going to leave that question for everyone.
I think that's a really good note to end on, Remah. And I'm so grateful to our three phenomenal candidates who are running in this federal election for your work as candidates. I know, Huong and Remah, you weren't getting paid for your time. Yeah, you did it for the love and solidarity with the movement, and I'm really grateful to everyone who's put so much time and energy into this movement over the last few years. I don't think we can clap for people on a Zoom chat, but just, I'm sure on behalf of everyone who's been following this discussion today, thank you all so much for your time. As I mentioned, the recording of this is going to be put up online so everyone can jump back and listen later. I'm going to end the recording now, and some of us are going to stay online for a little bit longer and chat. Thanks again, everyone.